Megan, do you want to introduce cottage cheese and dog shit?
So the reason we chose cottage cheese and dog shit as our next segment, and this kind of goes into what, being an activist in a way that is for you, is using things that you wouldn't normally think of. We have the story of cottage cheese in Israel, and then we have the story of dog shit with Harvey Milk. And these are how people use these things in a way to overhaul a system. So I'm just going to read. You want me to read the description real fast, Kateri?
Yeah, I wrote the basics down.
Yes, awesome. So for the cottage cheese, people in Israel wanted to overhaul the system of what they viewed as piggish capitalism. They really loved cottage cheese. It was a huge staple of their diet. But they kept raising the prices. So they couldn't afford, people in Israel couldn't afford to buy it. And it was a huge staple. And so I'm going to say his name so wrong. Itzik Alrav. I think he was like an insurance adjuster or something. He created this Facebook group called Cottage Cheese is such a basic product, and now it costs nearly 8 shekels. We won't buy it for 1 month. The idea being that people weren't going to eat it and just let it rot on the shelves, let it expire. So they couldn't sell it anyways. And this Facebook group starts off with just a few of his friends, and then it just grows exponentially. And eventually the companies would give like small concessions, and the Israelis were like, no, we want lower prices or we want nothing. Like, we're just not going to eat. And so eventually they got the price to 5 shekels. And then my favorite part about this is that they took that victory and used it to propel it was like a group of students who couldn't afford housing. And they realized, okay, if we can lower the price of cottage cheese, what else can we do? And they got the price of housing lowered, which is amazing. Kateri, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that. I feel like I covered it.
They did that by just the camping out in tents. So it was like reminiscent of Occupy movement. But I guess maybe one of the major differences is like they had a very tangible and achievable goal. That it was very specific and clear, and they were fighting for, we want affordable housing, and we are students and we're going to camp out. And so, yeah, that was the way that they got that victory. And then we have dog shit.
Yeah. So the story of Harvey Milk. That's so basically he was having a really hard time finding people to rally around him as he's trying to run for a public office. And
people say as an openly on like
yes.
Gay rights.
As an openly gay man, trying to get progress in the LGBTQ community and their rights. But that just wasn't something that everybody wanted to rally around. And so he finally realized, okay, well, what is one thing that everybody is sick of? They're sick of stepping in dog shit.
In San Francisco, by the way.
Yes, in San Francisco. So he rallied like all of San Francisco around the issue of dog shit plaguing their parks and sidewalks. And these are people of all sexual identities. And, he got them to rally around that. And that's how he won. And then once he was in, then he could make progress, in the ways that he wanted to.
Yeah. So these are 2 examples of how, a lot of the tenets of the rest of the book, a big one being unity, a big one being start small, find achievable tasks, and other things. So anyway, want to hear your guys' thoughts on this panel. Anyone want to just share their initial reaction to this story and the things that it, just made you think about?
I'll go first on this one if you guys don't mind.
Yes.
I love it because it's about organizing around anything. And this, just like this whole Wall Street thing just happened, man. They said, you know what, we're gonna change this. We're gonna exploit the system, use it against itself. And the same thing with supply and demand in a capitalist system. We're gonna upset the demand side of it. Then we can control the supply side, and vice versa. Like Wall Street can, or not Wall Street. Let's say people are in charge of a commodity. They decrease the availability, increases demand, justifies the price increase, right? The more rare something is, the higher demand it is, the higher the price is. Well, if we decide as a movement, as a people that says, you know what, we don't value your gold so much, we don't even want it. Sell your gold off, say we don't even want it, and stop buying that product, it will bring down the demand for the price will go down. And that's what I like about this type of stuff, is just being organized around something. It just shows you that you can literally do nothing and still do something. By doing nothing, if you organize doing nothing, it achieves a goal, which is, half the problem is a lot of movements ask too much, quote unquote, from people to sacrifice. This says, just don't buy that. It's okay. Just don't buy cottage cheese or any dairy products or whatever. It's a pretty cool concept. Like you're saying, organizing. It's like, how do you do this? This is how. Don't buy cottage cheese. Simple.
I think a quote that piggybacks off of that a bit is later it says, Al-Rab realized that talking about cottage cheese was a cover for Israelis to talk about the economy, about injustice, and about national priorities. So it goes to show how it's symbolic, but it's more than symbolic. How organizing around something that is really basic and really relatable to everyone who can possibly get involved and who's being affected by it, how it can be something really small and simple, but it can stand for so much bigger than itself. So yeah, I think that's a really, really important thing. Anyone else would like to chime in or piggyback? Sonia?
Yeah, you know what I thought was really cool that the author hits upon, and I think we've all been exposed to this, is he talks about how there's language that you have these lofty goals, like we want human rights, we want economic justice, and he drills it down to these actions that are, as you're pointing out, day-to-day things that affect every person. And that's where you get the power of, the masses. There's another example that I loved with Gandhi and the salt, like going to the ocean to get this salt. And it started like with 10 people and nobody really cared. Of course, now you have thousands of people going to get the salt from the ocean. And, all of a sudden, policemen, they're taking notice, like what's going on here. So he really takes like something like you're saying that's so basic that we all are affected by. I thought that's a powerful statement for us to look at in our own lives.
Absolutely. Lacey, please take it away.
Yeah, so this specific thing about cottage cheese really struck a chord with me. Because part of what we've been talking about on Rethinking Humanity recently are ways that we can shift as a society to a more being mode based society. What does that mean in layman's terms? That just means that we are actually living in our humanity versus kind of like being on this roller coaster and this being on autopilot. And so one of the ways that he describes that we might be able to make a shift to consuming in a different way, which is part of getting there, is consumer strikes. And that is basically exactly what they did with this cottage cheese. They said, no, we're not going to buy anymore until you put the price back where it was before. No, you're not going to take advantage of me because this is how things need to be. This is how they're going to be, or we're going to use our power to against you. And so I think the biggest thing from this cottage cheese thing is realizing how much power we have as consumers when we like come together. It doesn't even take like 80 or 70 or 60 or 50% of the population to do that. You can do that with 20%. You can do that with 25%. You can do that with 15% and make a dent in an industry. And then you have a chance to, have a conversation with the folks who are leading it, because that's the next step. Okay, now we're going to negotiate. And so I loved that particular story because of the power that it shows that we all have as consumers.
Well, I also want to go back. This also shows you what was right about Bernie. When Bernie said we need to have employees on the boards, we need to have union members at the table, or community organizers a seat at the table, part of the conversation. That'll bridge this gap. There'll be no need for this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Because there's some commodities we can't go without, like insulin. I'm a healthcare worker. My diabetic patients can't say, screw your insulin. They're dead. So that's why we need people in power to protect those people with our commodities, such as insulin, just as the most common example used in politics. But we got to have good leaders to protect those that can't go on strike for certain products, because insulin is the most inflated thing, next to like painkillers are also 1,000% markups, where people can't go without that and have their quality of life literally affected negatively. And I think the more time sensitive the thing is we strike around, the more immediate the like a commodity like cottage cheese, it goes bad. You know, if it's gold, they can wait on that for a long time, but cottage cheese, they got to get it off. It's got to sell within 30 days or whatever. And you can really tighten the screws. You know, that's how you really get it done, is make it time sensitive too, because they can outweigh us too. We got to be careful where we want to go, restricting our own commodities or whatever, but they can outweigh us too. So we got to be careful how to organize on that.
Yeah, such a great point. Like, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, and to the point of, I think, having people, laymen, you know, people who are the workers on the boards. Like, imagine if we were able to successfully reorient our society where that was the norm. So many more people would be so much more willing to organize, because they'd feel like, oh, like, so many people don't participate in politics. They're like, the system is broken. What's the point? You know, it's like, well, I might actually join a union or just be a part of this community group, because I know that there's someone that is actually going to be heard, and it's not going to feel like screaming into the void potentially.
Another thing that Fromm is proposing in his book is a thing called the lower, which would be groups of hundreds of thousands of people in different areas that are citizens, that are people who are knowledgeable on certain issues. And those being bodies of folks who gain information and then send information about what the public wants to the actual Congress. And so I just think it's a cool idea of how we might be able to get to that place, Kateri, of like people actually going, oh, I want to participate because, oh, what I'm saying actually might make a difference and people care what I have to say.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I have Fromm's book. I'm excited to I've listened to your podcast episodes on him, but I'm definitely going to actually read the book. He has so many good ideas. John, could you please say what you're going to say?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to our question about, you know, what are the challenges of getting people more involved in activism in general? And I think one thing that dictators and authoritarians and people who want to kind of maintain power over a structure, one thing they thrive on is negativity and overwhelming you. And we experienced this with Trump. It was like every day there was something new, and there were so many new things to be upset about that you kind of just felt overwhelmed. Like, how can I get involved with any of these individual details? And that's a fundamental thing that we all struggle with in our daily lives, when the more things you have in your daily life that you feel like are important that you need to take care of, the more we feel overwhelmed and like we can't even start. And there's a great book, David Allen wrote a book called Getting Things Done, where he goes into great detail about how you need to break it down into tiny little pieces and start with the smallest, easiest part. Because once you get the ball rolling, you get inspired to take on the bigger parts. And once you can see the progress you've been making, the more inspired you get to do more. And the same goes with getting people inspired in movements. If you can get them inspired over cottage cheese, something that they can identify with in their daily life, the more people you can get involved in that, the more you can get them start thinking about the next thing up the chain. Same thing with dog shit. You know, the Wall Street GameStop situation right now. If you go on Twitter, so many people are inspired to take this example and it's like, what are the next ways we can stick it to the man? And now there's a big movement on Twitter where people are saying, just like you mentioned, Boyce, we have power to not buy something. And the biggest thing that people are frustrated with, not the biggest, one thing that some people are frustrated with is this celebrity culture where people like Kylie Jenner can make all this money from all these followers she has. And now there's this big movement to just unfollow them. It's like, well, they don't have power over us. If we just don't listen to what they're doing or buy the product that they're selling, then we don't have to hear from them anymore. So the Wall Street, GameStop situation is now inspiring more people to think about other ways that they can get the ball rolling and the other things that they care about. So it's all about starting small with something that a lot of people can identify with and getting people involved and giving them a taste of that activism, because then we can do bigger things every day.
Yes. Makes me smile so much hearing that. Yeah.
I would also say the younger you get someone to be an activist, the more they're going to be an activist, just like voting. Voting is a form of activism. The younger you get someone to vote, the more likely they are to vote the rest of their life. I took my daughter at 16 to Yangapalooza, and she loved it, met all the people. She felt that thing that I felt, so she starts paying attention more to my content and Andrew Yang stuff, and she's talking about it at school now, which, again, the younger we get the kids started, and we got to lead by example, I think is another way of, as a parent, that's another detail, I think, is the younger the better.
That's so true what Roy said. My daughter is 9, and when Yang was running for president, I was not only Yang, but all the other candidates, I was teaching my daughter early about what they stand for, what they're talking about. And now at 9, actually she was 8 back then. At 8 years old, she was talking to her classmates about Andrew Yang. And so it's crazy how little kids can retain and learn quicker that way, instead of saying, oh, you're too young to learn about politics, so I'll just wait until you're 16, So.
Could you guys imagine being a teacher, using this in a classroom, or at least some certain chapters in a classroom? There's so many fun ways to teach these concepts to kids, I feel.
I was just thinking about it in terms of teaching a language, right? We always say you should teach a kid a language when they're young, because when you're adult, it's just a lot harder to learn these things. And so I was kind of oh, you could make a language for revolution, curriculum, teach it when they're young and have them grow up with it's you're starting them off with all of the same tools, and kids understand a lot more than we give them credit for too.
So let me ask you, who remembers this part in the book? Because I want to quote it, where this young girl, I think she was 14, got the flame retardant out of Gatorade. He talks about. Do you remember how old she was? She was able, and I was flame retardant in Gatorade. So she was able to get that removed. That's pretty cool.
I remember that part, but I know she was at least a teenager.
Right. I was thinking a teenager. So she was an activist. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it was maybe, no, it was in America, because I think it was paired with another example from somewhere else. So this was someone in America. Yeah. A youth. So yeah. Right. There's so many things you can focus on.
Can I just say, what the hell? Why is there flame retardant? Why the hell was there flame retardant in Gatorade? Hello.
Thank you.
It's so common sense. They're making it so easy for us, guys. There's so many things that we could totally just change.